Hello, welcome. I'm Megan Mutti. I'm the Director of Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center. And I'm here today with Tammy Roble and Ann Kramer, who have been very nice to join us on our only second podcast of the Family Matters podcast that we've just launched in the last week or so. We are adding this format as a way to reach more Illinois families and professionals with key information about disability supports and special education advocacy and navigation. The podcast will bring the voice of and experience of a variety of professionals and families to the table with a focus on exploring experiences, introducing best practices that are being implemented across the state, exploring services and supports, and sharing the input and guidance of families. So we encourage you to join the conversation at your favorite podcast app. We can be found at Family Matters PTIC Podcast. As a reminder, Family Matters PTIC is not a legal services agency, and we cannot provide legal advice. Information you receive in this podcast should not be construed as legal advice. Family Matters PTIC is one of two federally funded parent training and information centers in Illinois. The contents of this podcast were developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Our project officer is David Immenheiser. And with that, I want to go ahead and have Tammy and Ann introduce themselves and give you a little bit of background on their work in early childhood least restrictive environment, and we'll go from there. Ann, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Kramer. I'm the project director for Early Choices. First, I'll tell you about me, and then I'll tell you about Early Choices. How about that? So, I've been doing this work a long time. I started out as an elementary school teacher, and I got interested in early intervention and early childhood because I had a baby that had Down syndrome and was like, whoa, this is not what I was expecting. And I learned about inclusion and wanted to figure out how that could possibly work because I didn't think it could work from an elementary school perspective. And I went traveling around and listened to folks learned about inclusion and discovered that it can work. And in fact, I loved it and wanted that for my kiddo. And so I followed those folks around until they offered me a job helping them. So I started out as a parent consultant, supporting other families with inclusion, and have just stuck with it to be here for Early Choices, which is the Illinois initiative for inclusion birth to 5. So our focus is all on the early years and supporting programs, both school districts and community-based programs like Head Start and childcare, to implement inclusive practices and really support children and families wherever they are in their journey. And we do a lot of professional development. We do things like this. We have workshops for families, and we'll tell you about those a little later. But our whole job is to advance inclusion. And I'm going to let Tammy introduce herself.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ann. So I'm Tammy Roble. I'm an inclusion specialist with Early Choices. My journey is kind of similar to Ann's in that I was doing something, I wasn't even in the education field when I had my first kiddo. And shortly after I had my first child, we had a second child, and we found out very early in the pregnancy that she had Down syndrome. So at that time in the state of Illinois, before your child was born, you could have everything set up and ready to go. So as soon as that baby came home, services could get started. And so before she was born, we knew who our service coordinator was going to be. We were plugged in with early intervention. We had our physical therapist, our occupational therapist, our speech therapist, and our developmental therapist picked out and ready to go. So as soon as she came home from the hospital, we gave them a call and said, we are here, let's get it going. And that experience was wonderful, very inclusive experience. During that time, I realized that I should not be managing a financial aid office, that I should be helping promote inclusion to anyone that would possibly listen to me. And so I started doing some work as a developmental therapist for early intervention. I worked with different communities in coordinating community-wide screening so children can enroll in programs that offered inclusive opportunities, and then heard about Early Choices and all the awesome work that Early Choices is doing. And so I wanted to make a bigger impact And I'm so glad that I was able to join this team and the awesome work that is being done across the state of Illinois.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take an opportunity to plug Early Choices because it's an incredible resource for parents and families. So if you're interested in Early Choices, and I encourage you, if you have not gone to their website, just to take a look, it's www.eclre.org. They have resources that are just incredible and really inspire you to jump on board with this work. And Tammy, it's interesting to hear you talk about your experiences in early intervention. And right after, we had exactly the same experience in our family, and it really sort of set the tone about what we wanted and what we thought was possible. And that's also why I got involved in this work. So to hear the three of you, or to the two of you talk about that is interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So one of the things that we talk a lot about at Family Matters is high expectations, and starting out early in life with high expectations. And I think inclusion just naturally is woven into that. And so I was hoping you all could talk about how inclusion impacts long-term outcomes and why it's important. Why you spend, your life's work on this. Why should people be invested in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, inclusion changes lives, and it changes lives for the better. I have two kiddos with disabilities. One was fully included, one wasn't. Their lives now as adults are much different, and I am certain that that's because of the opportunities that they either were afforded or not afforded in school. And so we know that there's a ton of research out there that proves that inclusion for children during those school age years changes lives. It's so important. It's good for students with disabilities. It's good for students without disabilities. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to navigate. And I know we're going to talk about that a little later on, but it is difficult to navigate. And we're working really hard to empower parents and educate others, educate educators, so they can make the right decisions and do the right things for the children in this state, because it's the children's right and the parents' right to have this, to be included.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying it that way, because I think sometimes parents aren't empowered in that way. Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, Tammy mentioned the research, and oftentimes families will say to me, and I understand this is kind of my thinking too. They'll say, but if they're included, they're not getting something, or they're missing out on some special therapy or dedicated time from a professional who's going to teach them something. But what we know from all the research is that children actually do better when they're included in a regular preschool than when they're pulled out and educated separately away from their same age peers. And there's really no research that says kiddos do better when they're in those separate settings. They actually, we don't have anything that says that. And when you think about it, it makes sense. One of my stories from so Austin's in his 30s now, so this was a long time ago. But when he was included in preschool at age 3, he started at a childcare at age 3 with a couple words: daddy, kitty, and no. And all of his other language was sign language. So he had like maybe 100 signs that he could sign. And when he started, I had like a little notebook and I kept track of all this stuff. And I was like making, like copying in those days, taking my Joy of Signing book to the photocopier and making copies so that I could teach new signs to my family and his, anyone who came in contact with him. But that year, he started in July, and that year at Christmas time, I took the notebook home and I was trying to update it. And I realized he was saying all the words, right? Like he was around a bunch of talking 3-year-olds all day long. And guess what he became? A talking 3-year-old, right? Like we tried to teach his peers the sign for play and yogurt and all the things that Austin signed, and they did. But he was also so motivated. Some of that was developmental, but I also believe being around all those models was huge. And so when you think of that little example, and then you think about behavior, fine motor skills, all those other things that we're always working on, he had a bunch of models. And so he always could kind of look around and figure out, oh, that's what I should be doing. And
Oh,
so
that's
that's,
such a great example.
yeah. And it's always like one of those things that I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And we carried that on, right? As he was included in elementary school and high school and now as an adult, like those are always my kind of touchstones. Like, well, what are other 30-something-year-olds doing these days? You know?
Yes,
And we
I
need to
love that you
continue.
both tied that. I'm sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just going to say, we need to continue to listen to the adults that have disabilities about their experiences and how it changed their life, right? And we have a lot of stories from people that we work with, those self-advocates that will tell you how important inclusion is and how important it is to be able to have a happy, successful adult life.
That piece of time, I think sometimes because we're talking about early childhood, we're focused on young children, and that's where our brain goes 0 to 5. We're focused on that. So we forget exactly what you two are emphasizing, which is it's directly tied to adult outcomes. And you have to keep in mind, what outcome do I want 20 years from now? And it's easy to get lost in, well, programming and that type of thing. And so I so appreciate that piece because that's critical. And we see all the time that students who didn't have access to inclusive opportunity through the school system end up with lack of access to community. And it really impacts the quality of their life as adults. So thank you for making that connection so clearly. So imagine I'm a parent. I have a 2-year-old. I'm looking for a preschool program and I want an inclusive setting. We recently have had a family reaching out, cannot find an inclusive setting in their area. What can you give families some talking points as they approach some of these preschools or childcare centers to help them advocate with those centers to provide these opportunities?
This is so hard. I remember being in those shoes and you don't want to be apologizing for your own kid. Like that's not what you're doing here, right? Like and but yet you're asking something that some folks might be uncomfortable with. So it can be hard. I think the thing to remember is that you know how how lucky you are to have your kiddo, right? And to be able to say that like this is a great kid, right? Like this is, and I know this would be a great place for my child, and taking that kind of positive presupposition like this is a good thing, and using that as a lead. And I remember I also we again going back to research and whatnot, we know that all kids do better in an inclusive setting. So when we include a child with a disability, and if we have some supports coming in, whether that's early intervention supports, it could be some school district supports, but the early intervention provider can come to the childcare and help them work through some of the strategies or embed some of the skills that throughout the day with the childcare. So when that happens, those are usually just good things to be doing with kiddos, like maybe using some visuals, breaking down some skills instead of saying, go wash your hands, here's all the steps that we need to do to wash your hands. Those kinds of supports help all the children in a program. And then all the children do better in the program. So really, again, I hate to harp on the research, but it is super helpful as a way to bridge and promote how inclusion can be beneficial to you.
And in all the work we do, we talk about relationship building and how important that is as a first step to be able to have these kinds of conversations and change minds, right? So we can change lives. And so it's important to, maybe it's not just a phone call to a childcare center. Maybe it's I'm going to make a phone call and then I want to come in and visit and I want to tell you about my kiddo. And then I'm going to bring my kiddo with me next time, right? So you can meet them and see how awesome they are. I find that a lot of times it's that folks are scared. They're scared because they don't know. They've never done it before. And it's helpful when we have people that can support them in finding an inclusive place for their child and supporting the people that are educating our children. Because we have a ton of supports in the state of Illinois for childcares, so our children can be educated alongside typically developing peers. It's just so important. Use the
Could
resources.
you say that? Would you mind highlighting a couple of places if you had a family who really just didn't know where to go to look for those resources and they're starting that conversation? Where would you say, hey, this is the first step? Go to this site, go to this program and talk with them. Would you say Early Choices? What would you send them?
I would say Early Choices, come visit our website at eclre.org. I'd also say there's some good resources and information depending on where you are in the system. So the Early Intervention Clearinghouse has some great resources and kind of just some strategies to help you think through some of the pieces and the information. And also our Illinois Early Learning Project. They have some great resources to kind of help what's going, like, just even understanding what's happening in say a preschool or a childcare for 2-year-olds. Like, what is that? What is good quality? What is that? And what should I be looking for? I mean, I have a new granddaughter, and my daughter went to go look at the childcare, and she's like, we went in and we were there, and we get out, and she goes, I had no idea what to ask. I didn't even know what I was supposed to be looking for. I haven't been in a childcare since I was in childcare. And I'm like, oh yeah. So, and like, I'm your mother and I didn't think to prep you. So, we went and looked at some of the information from, the Illinois Network for Child Care Resource and Referral. And they have some great resources about what is high quality, like what should I be looking for in a childcare. And we do that. We tried to organize some, like, I don't know, maybe checklists or surveys or things that parents would want to think through when they're looking at a place to say, why would this be a good match for me and my family?
Because as you said, high quality for a kiddo who might have developmental differences is high quality for everyone. So, you're looking at high quality across the board.
Exactly. And you want, I mean, there's an element of emotion in there too, right? You're always looking for a place that aligns with your values or your thinking or your idea of what you're hoping for your kiddo. So sometimes, just thinking about what it is that you want and what do you want for your kiddo long term, right? And making that bridge to adulthood, and thinking about those big goals and how are we going to get closer to those big goals. And like, you think, like, what is a big goal? Like, I want my kids to be loved. I want them to have things in their life that are meaningful. I want them to have people close by that love them. So friendships and belonging is important for me. And so I wanted to make sure that that was built in to everything we did for both of our children. But I had to be a little bit more planful with Austin because for some things, Taylor could just naturally take the reins, and other things with Austin, I have to be a little bit more involved.
I love how you frame that, though, that you're looking at, I mean, what are really pretty basic needs that go by the wayside for some of our kids because we can't access them, like community, friendships, connection, and that starts so young. And then we have to, that's a consistent theme that has to be sort of intentionally planned throughout their life. So thank you. One of the things that we talked briefly about is, do you have any programs that stand out to you? Obviously, you don't have to identify them, but that really have just knocked it out of the park in terms of early childhood inclusion, that you've really seen some big wins. You'd love to see that mirrored in other programs.
Well, we are public about it. When you go to our website, you can find. So Early Choices, along with the Illinois State Board of Ed, sponsors a recognition of high quality inclusive programs. So it's called Outstanding Practices in Inclusion. And it's the idea is that programs who are doing a good job of including young children can apply for this recognition. And then we kind of vet them by they do a presentation showing us all their policies and procedures and pieces in place that they have that kind of build that foundation for inclusion. And then we use a classroom assessment tool and go into those programs and sample classrooms with the inclusive classroom profile. And if they score at a certain level, then they've achieved that recognition. And so it's kind of a lot to go through. So we don't have a lot of folks that have been recognized, mostly because it's a lot of work for them.
Sure.
But those are the places that we refer folks to go visit. Like if you want to talk with another program who's got it going on, we are sure these folks are doing a great job.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And say that, what's the name of it again, one more time, Ann, so they can go.
Sure. It's Outstanding Practices in Inclusion, and it's one of the pages on our website under opportunities and events.
Okay. Go ahead, Tammy.
Yeah, sure. We also have some other, we have for a few years now, some dedicated work in forming community inclusion teams and supporting those teams. And one of the wonderful things about community inclusion teams is that parents are at the table. Parents are at the table examining current procedures and practices. They're at the table when folks are working on changing current procedures and practices to make inclusive environments for children with disabilities. And so that's something I just want to make sure that we highlight today. If you're a parent and you're wanting to get involved, find out, give us a call, go on our website, see if there is a community inclusion team near you in the district that your child is attending, and get involved in that work. We've seen some really wonderful things happen. We talk at Early Choices sometimes about a backpack of resources and supports. And so inclusion isn't a place that a child goes to, right? It's the place where all children go to, and children with disabilities, they carry their resources and their supports with them. It's like a backpack, right? And so those resources and supports can go anywhere that child goes, anywhere that student goes. And when we're working with these community inclusion teams, we've had successes where districts are providing special education related services where those children are already at, because we know that some families cannot transport, nor should they transport half day, midday, go and get their child from the child care center and bring them to the district for services. That should not be happening, right? Children need to be educated where they are. We don't need to add more transitions to children's lives. And so that's it's a great way for parents to get involved in some really wonderful work that's happening in the state of Illinois.
Tammy, I want you to say again, your statement about, is inclusion a place?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So inclusion is not a place. It's not a specific place. Inclusion happens wherever your child is. One of the things that Ann said to me very early on when I started at Early Choices was that when we bring our kids home from the hospital, we don't segregate them. We are not segregating them. They don't eat in a different place. They don't learn in a different place. Why are we doing that when children enter the school system? It makes no sense at all.
We could talk about this until the end of time. But I love how you frame that. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
One of you talked a little bit about barriers, and I think that's an important piece, because I do think families run into barriers, families burn out, get frustrated seeking the kind of inclusive supports they're looking for. Could you talk about common barriers, and if you have ideas as how to kind of weave around those?
Yeah, we often talk about mindset. Mindset is I would say, primary barrier. And when we talk about mindset, we talk about, are you ready for change? Or are you not ready for change? So we talk about fixed mindset. So I'm going to keep doing these things exactly the same way I've been doing them because it works for me, and not realizing that it doesn't work for everybody. And so it's important to have a growth mindset. We do a lot of our work in examining attitudes and beliefs and helping people make that change toward from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset so we can do this work. And I often think that when we're parents, there's a lot of information that's being thrown at us all at the same time. These transitions from early intervention to school-based services are huge, right? We need people that we can reach out to for support to help us with those transitions and with those barriers, because there are a lot of barriers. I think it's really important for us to keep our mind at the end result, right? Adulthood, going back to what we talked about initially, and how important it is to make sure that we know that whatever we do now will impact our adult and our children's adult lives. And so, Anne, you were going to say something.
Well, the barriers thing, right? We could list them, right? People, I hear, well, we can't find the staff. We don't have anybody who has that expertise or can do that. We don't, we've never done it this way, so this is the way we do things here. We don't have that kind of program. Like those, but for families, I always, there are solutions to that, right? Like, obviously, if it can happen in one school district, it's not like they have some magic going on. What is it that they're doing that we need to be thinking about in another school district or in another community? And that is kind of what Tammy was talking about with the community inclusion teams. It's not, I don't have like a boilerplate frame that I could say, school district A, if you would just blankety blank, you would be inclusive. It doesn't work that way, because as we know, right, like we have different sizes, different building configurations, big giant districts, right? You could live in Chicago, you could live in Elgin, U46, that's a huge school district. You could live in a tiny little district that doesn't even have early childhood in their district. They are so tiny that maybe they only have a couple of kiddos and they use a co-op or they combine with a neighbor. So all of those things kind of mean it has to be individualized. But the bottom line is that, as Tammy said, inclusion is a set of services. When you get your IEP for special education, those services are portable. And so they should go where the child is. And so that's really, it's really the district's responsibility to help us figure that out. And you're a partner in that, but you don't have to solve it all. You have your pieces that you can bring. And ISBE provides a lot of guidance for school districts, and families are welcome to look at that information. We have some on our website for early choices, but also ISBE has a whole preschool inclusion or preschool LRE inclusion. I think if you Google that for ISB, you'll find their page, and it has a lot of our resources, and then some federal guidance, local state guidance, how to, the money thing, right? Like families can't figure that out. That's the district's responsibility. So there's guidance for districts on that. There's resources they can be looking at. And so that's really Early Choice's job, is to support those programs in that piece. And families, just looking at what it is they want, why they're looking for this, and kind of, the legal and professional foundations that allow for inclusion.
And I would want families to know and remember that they know their child the best. And so often, my experience, what I'm finding is that when we start children, if they receive early intervention services, so the services that children receive ages birth to 3, we transition them into school-based services. A lot of professionals, including the therapists that are serving our children and families, aren't aware of the law that supports least restrictive environment. They aren't aware of the benefits of inclusion. Many times we have our professionals telling us that your child would be better educated in a smaller self-contained classroom. They're going to get more instruction. We know that's not the case. It's not that we hope that's not the case. We know that that is not true. And so I think, as a parent, I would want you just to make sure that you trust yourself You know what's best for your child. If someone tells you what is best, go out and do your research. Call somebody like Family Matters, call somebody like Early Choices. There's a lot of different organizations across the state that can support you and get you the information that you need to make the best decision for your child.
Thank you. I think families often feel like, particularly when seeking inclusive opportunities, is swimming upstream. It just gets fatiguing after a while because they do feel like they're constantly having to convince other people of the value of inclusion. And so knowing there's resources out there, and that basic idea of you can trust your gut always. And
Absolutely.
if that's what you're seeking, there's support out there. So I appreciate that. And then Anne brought up the idea of federal guidance. And I know that you all are both very excited, as are we at Family Matters, about the most recent guidance around inclusion in early childhood and policy statement. So I was hoping you would talk a little bit about your thoughts on that, what that means, anything you'd want to share.
Oh, we're so excited. We can't stand it. I've already done like a couple webinars about it. Like, so there's back in 2015, the U.S. Department of Ed and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services issued a joint policy statement around inclusion. And that was important because it brought together education, the education folks, and then the government agency that oversees Head Start and childcare, all together saying early childhood inclusion is important. And we need to do better at this. And that was in 2015. And it was powerful, and we used that statement, and we loved it. Then, we all know what happened in 2020. We had a pandemic, and what they noticed, what we all noticed, was that things did not move forward. Things kind of stalled out in terms of inclusion. And we weren't doing that great as a nation in the first place. In that first policy statement, they talked about how in 25 years, we'd only made 7% progress in terms of including more children in early years. So they reissued the policy statement this last November of 2023. And really, they just reiterate a lot of the content from the first one in terms of the expectation that all children should have access to inclusive opportunities, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their location, their disability. Like we can't say, well, everybody but you. Like, who's the last car on the train? Like, there's no cutoff here. It's not like it's for some and it's not for you. It's for everyone. And they're very clear about that. And they reiterate the research. They reiterate the legal foundations, how IDEA supports inclusion, and the intent that least restrictive environment is where the child would be if they did not have a disability. And that's a little easier to kind of put your head around when your kiddo's like 9 and they're in 3rd grade, right? Like, oh, 3rd grade. But when your child is younger, say 2, 3, 4, you're like, I don't know. It could be home, right? Like it could be childcare. It could be Head Start. It's different in that it is the school district's responsibility to consider where that child would be if they did not have a disability. And we have to have that conversation and start with the least restrictive environment as the placement. And so if they're already being served the guidance is clear, if they're already being served in a childcare or a Head Start and they just need some extra services, we need to consider that as their placement and think about how we can get those services there, which is something that we've been advocating for a long time, but now we have the federal guidance. It's much more spelled out. And the other great thing about the guidance is it's so much more in depth, and it gives real life examples and strategies to implement. So it isn't just here's what you got to do. It's here's what you can do. And then look at these states, look at these communities and see what they've done. And I'm super proud to say that Illinois is highlighted in here a couple times. And so one around that community inclusion work. And then the last piece is around the understanding inclusion modules that are on our website. I'm gonna let Tammy talk about it because I know she loves it and she's also doing some training on it coming up.
Thanks, Anne. So our understanding inclusion modules were written along, families had a part in that. So families helped us write those modules. There are several modules on our website. The great thing is they're self-paced. They're made for parents. You go through those modules and there's different topics. Each topic or each module has a different guide. So it really encourages you to think about what it looks like for you. What does this mean to you? What does this look like for your child? How can you make that happen? And walks you through the steps so you can make that happen. So that's the great thing about those modules. Those modules can also be shared with the people that are caring for your child. It's really great to have a discussion, a team discussion, so folks know how to best support your child in inclusive settings. And we do have a 3-series happening in August, 3-part series happening in August for families. April. I'm so sorry.
Another month that starts with A, April.
That's right, in April. Thank you. So April, oh gosh, it's on our website.
April 4th is the first one.
18th and 25th, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, 4th, 18th, and 25th, and you can register on our website. You can register through the early intervention training program. And we are really looking forward to providing support and having conversations with families about how they can best support their child.
I mean, you have several times throughout our conversation today really highlighted family engagement and the critical role of family engagement in policy and quality improvement across the board. And obviously at Family Matters, that's a huge issue for us. It's something we promote pretty strongly. But I just wanted to re-emphasize how critical it is that families bring their voices to the table and put some pressure on systems that need some improvement. And Illinois has a lot of progressive work around early childhood, least restrictive environment. Really, we're in a great state for a system that really understands how to move the ball on that. And so again, as we close out, I want to encourage you to participate in the trainings that Tammy is highlighting. We will push those out with this so that you could see the website where you can register. If you want to get involved in the community inclusion teams, you can reach out to early childhood if you're in those areas and they can connect you where there's openings. And if you have questions about anything that was brought up today, you can reach out to us at Family Matters. We'll connect you to the resources. We can connect you to Ann and Tammy. But we really appreciate it. This was fabulous. I could talk to you all day. I could listen to your passion for this all day. It is so fantastic. So thank you for sharing. And I do expect that you'll hear from some families who want to get engaged on this topic. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having us, Megan.
Thank you.